Oh, where to begin? They always say hindsight is 20/20ths, but even as I sit here typing this, I can hardly believe how my life took such a bizarre and unexpected turn. Let me introduce myself. I'm Adam, 32, and for the past 6 years, I thought I was living the dream. My wife, Emily, is, or was, everything I could ever ask for: smart, funny, kind, and with a charm that could make a saint smirk. We had one of those relationships people envy. You know, the couple goals kind. We met at a coffee shop where she spilled a latte all over my laptop. Classic meet-cute stuff. She insisted on buying me a replacement coffee, and what started as awkward small talk turned into a 4-hour conversation. Before I knew it, I was hooked. We dated for 2 years, and when I proposed, I thought I'd won the lottery. Emily works as an accountant at a big-shot firm, and I'm an admin at a buzzing downtown restaurant. We both have our passions. I hit the gym religiously while she embraced her love for yoga. And let me tell you, she wasn't just good at it, she was obsessed. Every Wednesday and Friday evening, Emily would slip into her yoga leggings, kiss me on the cheek, and head off to her club. I didn't pry. Why would I? Trust was the foundation of our relationship, or so I believed. Our weekends were sacred: Saturday hikes, Sunday brunches, lazy movie nights. Life was good. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but Emily always had this way of smoothing things over with her soft smile and those big hazel eyes. But if life were a movie, this is the part where the record scratches. Because what I stumbled into one Friday night made me realize that the life I thought was perfect was nothing but a mirage. When you're with someone for 6 years, you think you know them like the back of your hand, right? You memorize their quirks, their routines, the way they hum off-key to 80s pop songs while brushing their teeth. That was Emily for me, predictable in the most comforting way. But looking back now, I realize there were cracks in the mirror long before I noticed them. Emily and I were opposites in some ways. I'm the type to wear my heart on my sleeve, while she kept her emotions neatly tucked away like the receipts in her wallet, organized, precise, but always out of sight. And while we both worked hard at our jobs, Emily had this unrelenting ambition that sometimes made me feel like I was just coasting by in comparison. It wasn't a competition, though. I loved her drive, her intellect, the way she lit up when she talked about a project at work or planned her yoga sessions like they were grand adventures. I encouraged her to go to yoga as often as she wanted because I thought it was her outlet, a little pocket of peace in our otherwise busy lives. Her enthusiasm was infectious. I even considered joining her once, but she shot me down gently. "Adam, it's my thing," she said with a chuckle. "You'd hate it anyway. All those poses and slow breathing. You'd get bored in 5 minutes." She wasn't wrong. I'm a treadmill and weights guy, the kind who prefers the clanging of iron plates to the sound of meditative chants. So, I let her have her thing without a second thought. Trust, right? That's the word I clung to when Emily's yoga sessions started running late. At first, it was just 15 minutes here or there. Then, it stretched to half an hour, sometimes an hour. She'd text me, of course, "Class ran over. Be home soon. Love you." And every time, I'd believe her. Why wouldn't I? Emily wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend. My partner. Yet, there were moments, tiny, fleeting moments, that gnawed at me. Like how she'd slip her phone into her bag as soon as I walked into the room. Or how she'd seem distracted during our Saturday hikes, her eyes scanning the horizon as if looking for something, or someone. "Everything okay?" I asked her once, halfway up a trail we'd done a dozen times before. "Of course," she said, flashing that smile I adored. Why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't it be? It was a simple question, and yet, her response lingered in the back of my mind like a mosquito you can't quite swat away. I shook it off, told myself I was being paranoid. And then there was her newfound obsession with privacy. Emily, who used to leave her phone lying around the house, suddenly became glued to it. She claimed it was work emails, and again, I didn't push. She worked in a high-pressure environment, maybe her firm was just piling it on. But the real kicker came one Wednesday night. She came home from yoga, her face flushed and glowing, not unusual after a workout. But her hair, usually tied up in a neat ponytail, was disheveled, strands clinging to her neck in a way that seemed more chaotic than post-exercise. "Good class?" I asked, trying not to sound suspicious. "Great," she said, dropping her bag by the door. "We tried a new partner sequence. Really intense. Partner yoga? That was a first." Emily always said yoga was her solo escape, her way of centering herself. Yet here she was, talking about partnering up as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't know what to make of it, so I let it slide. That was the thing about Emily, she had this way of disarming me, of making me doubt my own instincts. And maybe I wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the picture of perfection we'd built together. But something had shifted, even if I couldn't put my finger on it. Little did I know, the answers were waiting for me just around the corner, hidden in the basement of a yoga studio where my perfect world was about to come crashing down. Weekends were our sanctuary. No matter how chaotic the week had been, her endless spreadsheets and tax season crunches, my 12-hour shifts dealing with restaurant staff and fussy customers, Saturdays and Sundays were our time. We had rituals, you see. On Saturdays, we'd hike at Willow Creek, stopping halfway to share a granola bar and sit in comfortable silence. Sundays were for brunch at this tiny cafe we'd stumbled on years ago, where the pancakes were fluffy, the coffee was strong, and the waitress always remembered our orders. It was in these moments, these little pockets of normalcy, that I felt closest to Emily. She'd slip her hand into mine as we walked, or lean her head on my shoulder during a movie night. Even after 6 years, we still had that spark. Or so I thought. This particular weekend, though, something was off. It started on Friday night. Emily came home from yoga later than usual, her face flushed but her expression unreadable. I chalked it up to exhaustion, but when I kissed her cheek, she barely leaned into it. "You okay?" I asked as she dropped her bag and headed for the fridge. "Yeah, just tired," she said, grabbing a bottle of water. "Long week." I didn't press further, though I noticed how she avoided eye contact. The next morning, I figured a good hike would shake off whatever weirdness was in the air. We set out for Willow Creek, the familiar trail winding through the woods like an old friend. Normally, Emily would chat about work or point out random flowers she thought were pretty, but this time, she was quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, but the kind that felt heavy, like the air before a storm. At one point, I stopped mid-trail and turned to her. "You sure you're okay? You've been awfully quiet today." She gave me a tight smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Adam. Just stuff on my mind." "Work stuff?" "Yeah," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "Work stuff." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the way she avoided looking at me, the way her hands fidgeted with the straps of her backpack, it didn't feel like work stuff. "Do you want to talk about it?" I pressed, trying to sound casual. "Not really," she said, her voice clipped. "Can we just enjoy the hike?" I let it drop. What else could I do? Still, the rest of the trail felt heavier somehow, like I was walking beside a stranger rather than the woman I'd shared my life with. That evening, we stuck to our usual movie night plan. I queued up one of our favorite rom-coms, but Emily barely paid attention. Her phone kept buzzing, and every time it did, she'd glance at the screen, smile faintly, and set it face down on the couch. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just work stuff," she said again, a little too dismissively. It was strange. Normally, she'd joke about her coworkers or roll her eyes at office drama. But now? Nothing. Just vague, one-word answers and that same tight-lipped smile. By the time Sunday rolled around, I was convinced I was imagining things. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. Maybe she really was just stressed. Tax season was always brutal for her, and I knew how much she hated letting anyone down at work. So, when we went to our usual brunch spot, I tried to push my doubts aside. But even there, Emily wasn't herself. She picked at her pancakes, barely touching them, and scrolled through her phone under the table when she thought I wasn't looking. I tried to make conversation, about work, the hike, even the ridiculous rom-com we'd half-watched the night before, but every response felt hollow, like she was just going through the motions. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Emily, seriously. What's going on? You've been a million miles away all weekend. She looked up, startled, like she hadn't realized I was paying attention. I told you, Adam. It's just work. Can you drop it? Her tone stung, sharper than I'd expected. I leaned back in my chair, stunned into silence. This wasn't like her. Sure, we'd had arguments before, but she was never this distant. Fine, I said eventually, forcing a smile. Let's just enjoy brunch. But the truth was, I wasn't enjoying anything. My perfect weekends, my perfect wife, my perfect life, it all felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know why. By the time we got home, the tension between us was palpable. Emily disappeared into the bedroom with her phone, and I stayed in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut, gnawing at me like a dog with a bone. I told myself I was overthinking it, that it was just a rough patch, that we'd talk it out eventually. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a rough patch. Something had changed, and I was terrified to find out what it was. Sunday evening crept in, bringing with it a stillness that felt more like unease than calm. Emily spent most of the day holed up in our bedroom, emerging only for the occasional glass of water or snack. I tried to distract myself, did some laundry, worked on my meal prep for the week, but every time I glanced toward the closed door, my mind raced with questions I couldn't quite answer. By the time she came out, her hair was slightly mussed, her phone glued to her hand like it had been all weekend. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was like she was going through the motions, a stranger wearing my wife's face. Hey, I ventured, trying to sound casual as I folded a t-shirt. You feeling any better? She blinked at me, as if surprised I'd asked. Better? Yeah, I said. You've been off lately. I figured maybe something was up, work stress or something. Her lips tightened, and she gave a shrug. Yeah. Work's just been a lot. The vague answer wasn't like her. Emily was usually an open book when it came to work complaints, regaling me with stories about her boss's quirks or her coworker who kept microwaving fish in the break room. But now? Nothing. Just a wall. Is there anything I can do to help? I pressed, folding another shirt to keep my hands busy. She hesitated, her eyes darting to her phone for a split second before landing back on me. No, Adam. I'm fine. Really. The conversation felt unfinished, but I didn't want to push her. So, I nodded and let it drop, for now. But the rest of the evening didn't feel any less strained. We ordered takeout, as usual for Sundays, and watched a show we both liked. Emily laughed in the right places, but it felt forced, like she was acting for an audience of one. After dinner, I started cleaning up while Emily sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a look of intense concentration. I couldn't help but glance over every now and then, my stomach twisting with each little smirk or giggle she let out. Finally, I broke the silence. You've been on your phone a lot this weekend. Emily looked up, startled. Have I? Yeah, I said, keeping my tone as neutral as I could. It's just, not like you. Usually, weekends are our time, you know? Her face softened, but not in a reassuring way, it was more like she was trying to placate me. I know. I'm sorry, babe. It's just, work group chat stuff. They're rolling out new policies, and everyone's freaking out. It sounded reasonable enough, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced the line in her head before saying it out loud. Oh, I said, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Must be some intense policies, huh? She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You have no idea. That was the end of it, for the night, at least. But as I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling while Emily dozed beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the phone or the vague answers. It was everything, her distance, her sudden disinterest in the things we used to share, the way she'd smile at her screen but barely look at me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her. But the shadow of doubt was growing, creeping into every corner of my mind. As the hours ticked by and sleep refused to come, I made a decision. I would go to her yoga class that Friday. Just to see. Not because I didn't trust her, at least, that's what I told myself, but because I needed to prove to myself that everything was fine. I had no idea how wrong I was. In the days leading up to Friday, Emily seemed to slip back into her usual self, or at least a version close enough to convince me that maybe I'd just been overthinking. Monday morning, she gave me a quick kiss before heading to work, her usual bright-eyed smile back in place. Don't work too hard, she teased as she grabbed her coffee mug. I watched her walk out the door, the pit in my stomach easing ever so slightly. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe this was just one of those rough patches all couples go through. By the time I left for work, I'd almost convinced myself that everything was fine. The week passed in a blur of routines that felt comfortingly familiar. Emily started texting me more during the day, little things, like funny memes or updates about her annoying coworker. At dinner, she laughed at my stories about the chaos at the restaurant, and on Tuesday night, she even suggested we play one of our favorite board games, a ritual we hadn't indulged in for weeks. For a moment, it felt like we were finding our groove again. See? I told myself. You're just paranoid. She's fine. You're fine. Everything is fine. On Wednesday morning, she surprised me by making breakfast. Nothing fancy, just scrambled eggs and toast, but it was something she hadn't done in ages. Wow, I said, sitting down at the table. What's the occasion? She shrugged, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Just felt like it. You've been doing so much around here lately, I wanted to do something nice for you. The gesture was simple, but it warmed my heart. Maybe I'd been wrong to doubt her. Maybe I'd let my insecurities get the better of me. That evening, she went to her yoga class as usual. I might grab a smoothie with the girls after, she said, slipping on her shoes by the door. Don't wait up, okay? Sure, I said, giving her a quick kiss. Have fun. As I watched her leave, the doubts crept back in, gnawing at the edges of my mind. But I pushed them down. This was Emily. My wife. She wasn't doing anything wrong. By Thursday, things felt almost normal. We cooked dinner together, laughing as she burned the garlic bread, a running joke in our household. Later, we curled up on the couch to watch a documentary she'd been raving about. She even fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, her phone forgotten on the coffee table. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were back on track. The distance that had hung between us seemed to be shrinking, and I told myself I was imagining things. But then Friday came, and with it, a quiet tension I couldn't quite place. Emily seemed distracted. She left for work without her usual cheery goodbye, and when I texted her during lunch, her responses were curt, almost hurried. When she got home, she was in a rush, tossing her bag on the couch and heading straight to the bedroom to change into her yoga gear. "You okay?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Yeah," she said, slipping on her leggings. "Just running late. Want me to pick you up after class?" She froze for half a second before shaking her head. "No, that's okay. I'll just grab a ride with one of the girls. Don't worry about it." I nodded, trying to ignore the unease bubbling in my chest. "All right. Have a good class." She smiled, but it didn't feel quite right. And as she walked out the door, I found myself staring after her, the doubts rushing back like an unwelcome tide. This was it. I had to know. I grabbed my jacket and keys, my heart pounding as I made up my mind. I was going to her yoga class that night. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut any longer. Friday wasn't just another day, it was the day everything changed. The idea to visit Emily's yoga club didn't hit me all at once. It started as a tiny whisper in the back of my mind, what if, that grew louder with every odd glance, every vague excuse, every late night that didn't add up. That Friday morning, as I watched Emily hurry out the door, something clicked. Maybe it was the way she avoided meeting my eyes, or how her usual kiss goodbye felt like an afterthought, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her yoga nights than she was letting on. Still, the thought of spying on her felt ridiculous. This was Emily, my wife, the woman who once binge-watched crime documentaries with me while mockingly narrating how the cheating husbands in every episode always got caught. She wasn't like those people. She couldn't be. Could she? I carried that thought with me all morning, replaying the past few weeks in my head like a broken record. The phone glued to her hand. The late nights. The distant looks. And then there was last Wednesday, when I offered to pick her up from class and she immediately said no. "No, that's okay," she'd said, her voice a little too casual. "I'm catching up with the girls afterward. You don't need to worry about me." But maybe I did need to worry. By the time my lunch break rolled around, I couldn't focus on anything else. The idea had taken root, stubborn and unshakable. I didn't even know what I was looking for, maybe just some reassurance that everything was fine. Maybe I needed to see her surrounded by yoga mats and candles and nothing more suspicious than an overly flexible instructor. I considered just asking her outright. I could call, tell her I was feeling uneasy, and ask to come see her class for myself. But I knew how that would play out. "Adam, you're being ridiculous," she'd say, her voice laced with laughter. "It's just yoga." And then she'd pull away even further, convinced I didn't trust her. But wasn't that exactly the problem? That I didn't trust her? I sat in the break room, staring at my uneaten sandwich as the seconds ticked by. The voice in my head grew louder. "You have every right to know," it said. "You're her husband. You're not snooping. You're just checking in." The justification felt flimsy, but it was enough to push me toward a decision. When I got home that evening, Emily was already there, her yoga bag packed and sitting by the door. She was rushing, distracted, barely sparing me a glance as she tied her hair into a loose bun. "You heading out soon?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Yeah," she said, slipping on her sneakers. "I'm running late, actually. Don't wait up, okay?" She grabbed her bag and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, then disappeared out the door without another word. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where she'd just been. The decision solidified in my mind. I needed to go. Not to catch her in anything, just to see. To prove to myself that the little voice in my head was wrong, that I was wrong. I grabbed my jacket and keys, my heart pounding as I stepped outside. I didn't know exactly what I'd find at the yoga studio that night, but one thing was certain. I wasn't coming back without answers. The drive to the yoga studio felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my knuckles white as I navigated the familiar streets. The closer I got, the more I questioned myself. Was I being paranoid? Overdramatic? Was I about to embarrass myself by storming into a perfectly innocent yoga class like some jealous lunatic? Part of me wanted to turn around, to go back home and wait for Emily like I always did. She'd come back after class, maybe a little tired, maybe with another one of her vague excuses about hanging out with the girls. I could go on pretending that everything was fine. But another part of me, the part that noticed the way she'd been acting lately, couldn't let it go. My gut twisted as I pulled into the parking lot, scanning for her car. There it was, parked neatly near the entrance. That should have reassured me. She was here, at the yoga studio, just like she said she would be. But the uneasy feeling in my chest didn't budge. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the softly glowing sign that read Harmony Yoga Studio. The name felt ironic now, given the storm brewing in my head. I glanced at my phone, half tempted to call her. Maybe I could feign a reason to pick her up, or ask her to come home early. Anything to avoid walking inside and confronting whatever truths lay behind those doors. But then I saw it, a group of women walking into the studio, chatting and laughing as they carried their yoga mats. It was so ordinary. So harmless. See? I muttered to myself. It's just yoga. And yet, I couldn't make myself leave. I stepped out of the car, my legs heavy as I made my way toward the studio. The warm glow of the lights inside spilled out onto the sidewalk, and I could hear soft music playing, calming, meditative, the kind that made you think of incense and mindfulness. The receptionist at the front desk greeted me with a polite smile as I stepped inside. "Hi there, can I help you?" Yeah," I said, my voice catching slightly. "I'm, looking for someone. My wife, Emily. She's supposed to be here for a class." The receptionist's brow furrowed slightly. "Oh, Emily? She's one of our regulars. They're in the studio right now. Did you want to wait for her?" I hesitated, glancing toward the door she'd gestured to. Through the frosted glass, I could make out vague shapes, figures moving slowly, deliberately. "I'll just, peek in," I said, trying to sound casual. "I don't want to interrupt." The receptionist gave a small shrug, clearly unbothered. "Go ahead. Just keep it quiet, they're in the middle of a session." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat as I moved toward the door. My heart was pounding now, the rhythmic thud echoing in my ears as I reached for the handle. This was it. I would open the door, see Emily practicing her downward dog or whatever pose she was into, and laugh at how foolish I'd been. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. But as I cracked the door open and peered inside, something about the scene didn't feel right. The room was dimly lit, with soft amber lights casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. A dozen or so people were scattered throughout, paired off into small groups. They weren't sitting on yoga mats in the traditional poses I'd expected. Instead, they were standing close together. Whispering. Laughing. The soft music playing in the background was calming, yes, but the energy in the room was anything but meditative. It felt intimate. Almost conspiratorial. I scanned the room, my eyes darting from one pair to the next, searching for Emily. My heart sank a little further with every second that passed. She wasn't here. I stepped back, letting the door close quietly behind me. The receptionist glanced up, giving me a curious look, but I barely registered it. Where was she? If this was her class, then why wasn't she in there? I turned and headed toward the hallway, my pulse quickening with every step. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Maybe she'd stepped out for a moment. Maybe she was in the restroom. Maybe. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus. I needed to find her. I needed answers. And yet, deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The receptionist hadn't given me a second glance as I lingered near the front desk, feigning casual curiosity. I told myself I'd wait, give it a few minutes before trying again. Maybe Emily had stepped out for water, or maybe she was in some tucked-away corner of the studio I hadn't seen yet. But the minutes ticked by, and that nagging feeling in my chest only grew stronger. I couldn't just stand there. "Excuse me," I said, forcing a polite smile as I approached the receptionist again. "Is there a restroom I could use?" She looked up from her computer and nodded toward the hallway. "Sure thing. Down the hall, last door on the right. Men's locker room has one inside." I thanked her and headed down the hall, my heart thudding louder with every step. The soft music from the studio seemed to follow me, but it felt distant now, drowned out by the rush of my own thoughts. When I pushed open the door to the locker room, I was greeted by the faint scent of eucalyptus and the hum of a distant air vent. The place was empty, or so it seemed at first glance. Rows of wooden lockers lined the walls, and a bench ran down the middle of the room. I took a step forward, heading toward the back where the restroom was supposed to be. That's when I heard it, a low murmur, followed by a soft laugh. I froze, my pulse quickening. The sound was coming from just around the corner, near the showers. Maybe it's nothing, I told myself. Probably just someone on their phone. But then I heard it again, clearer this time, a voice, hushed and familiar. Emily's voice. I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. My feet moved on their own, carrying me closer to the source of the sound. As I turned the corner, my breath caught in my throat. There she was. Emily. My wife. She was dressed in a ridiculous tiger costume, her yoga leggings rolled halfway down her hips, her hair mussed and falling into her face. And she wasn't alone. A man stood pressed against her, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. He was dressed in what could only be described as a Hippo onesie, the absurdity of it clashing with the raw intimacy of the moment. His face was buried in her neck, his hands gripping her as though they'd been caught in some desperate, feverish embrace. They were kissing. No, not just kissing. They were lost in each other, oblivious to everything else, their passion raw and unrestrained. My vision blurred, my chest tightening as the scene unfolded before me like some twisted nightmare. I wanted to shout, to scream, to demand an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. My hand fumbled for my phone, and before I even realized what I was doing, I'd snapped a photo. The soft click of the shutter broke the silence, and for a moment, I thought they'd heard me. But they didn't. They were too caught up in each other to notice the man standing just feet away, his world shattering with every second that passed. I turned and walked out, my legs shaky, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The moment I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the photo on my phone, my mind racing. What had I just seen? How had this become my life? And what the hell was I supposed to do now? The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached, and my mind raced with fragments of what I'd just seen. Emily, my Emily, half-dressed and tangled in someone else's arms, wearing that absurd tiger costume like it was the most natural thing in the world. What kind of place was that? A yoga studio? No, this was something else, something I couldn't wrap my head around. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my anger had hardened into cold determination. I needed answers. And if Emily wasn't going to give them to me, I'd find them myself. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me. The photo I'd taken stared back at me from the screen, both absurd and devastating. Every time I looked at it, my chest tightened, but I forced myself to focus. The first thing I did was search the yoga studio's name. Harmony Yoga Studio. Its website was perfectly innocent, stock photos of smiling instructors, a class schedule boasting everything from beginner flow to hot yoga. But nothing about role-playing clubs or tiger costumes. I tapped my fingers on the table, frustration mounting. This wasn't going to be easy. Then it hit me. I had connections, friends in law enforcement, people who knew how to dig deeper than a Google search. I picked up my phone and called Ryan, an old buddy who worked in the local police department. Adam? Ryan's voice was groggy, like I'd woken him up. Hey, man, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need a favor. What's going on? It's complicated, I said, rubbing my temple. I need you to look into something for me. There's this yoga studio downtown, Harmony Yoga. Can you see if there's anything unusual about it? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Unusual how? Just anything that might not be above board, I said, my voice tight. Like illegal activity or something. Ryan sighed. All right, I'll see what I can find. Give me a couple of hours. Thanks, man, I said, hanging up. The waiting was excruciating. I paced the living room, replaying the night in my head over and over. Every time I thought of Emily and that man, the Hippo, my mind bitterly supplied, I felt a fresh wave of anger and betrayal. When my phone finally buzzed, I snatched it up like a lifeline. Adam, Ryan said, his tone serious. You were right to ask. That place isn't a yoga studio. Not really. What do you mean? I asked, my stomach twisting. It's a front, Ryan said. They run these events there. Private, members-only stuff. It's all under the radar, no permits, no inspections. From what I could dig up, it's technically a role-playing club. Illegal as hell, but they've been careful to keep it quiet. I sank into a chair, the weight of his words pressing down on me. A role-playing club? Yeah, Ryan said. They market it as alternative wellness or some nonsense, but it's basically people dressing up and acting out fantasies. Nothing dangerous, from what I can tell, but definitely not yoga. My mind reeled. This was what Emily had been doing all those nights she said she was at yoga. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. Thanks, Ryan, I said, my voice hollow. I owe you one. Adam, he said, his tone softening. You okay? Yeah, I lied. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. Not even close. I sat there for a long time after the call ended, staring at the photo on my screen. Emily hadn't just been lying to me. She'd been living a completely different life, one I hadn't even glimpsed until tonight. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that she hadn't even tried to hide it. Something inside me snapped. If she thought she could lie to me and get away with it, she was wrong. I didn't just want answers anymore. I wanted justice. When Emily walked through the front door that night, she looked like the same woman I'd loved for 6 years. Her hair was slightly damp, her cheeks flushed, and her yoga bag slung casually over her shoulder. She gave me a tired smile as she kicked off her sneakers. Hey, she said, dropping her bag by the door. Sorry I'm late. Class ran over, and we grabbed smoothies after. The lie slid out of her mouth so effortlessly that I almost believed it, almost. I forced a smile, pretending nothing was wrong. No worries. Did you have a good time? Yeah, she said, heading toward the kitchen. It was a tough class, though. I'll probably feel it tomorrow. I followed her, leaning against the counter as she grabbed a glass of water. My mind raced with the knowledge I now carried. The image of her in that tiger costume burned into my memory. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but something held me back. Not yet. She didn't know I knew. That was my leverage. For the next hour, I played my part, asked her about her day, laughed at her jokes, even helped her set up for her usual post-yoga shower. All the while, my mind churned with the beginnings of a plan. It was clear now that Emily wasn't just hiding her actions, she was part of something bigger, something illegal. That yoga studio wasn't just a place for harmless stretches and breathing exercises. It was a front for their illicit role-playing games, and I had the proof to bring it all down. The photo on my phone wasn't just a betrayal captured in pixels. It was my key to justice, or revenge, depending on how you looked at it. Once Emily disappeared into the shower, I grabbed my phone and sat down at the kitchen table, scrolling through my contacts until I found Ryan's name again. I hesitated for a moment before typing out a text. "Ryan, I've got proof about that studio. We need to shut it down." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the send button. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about exposing the lies, the deceit, the audacity of what they were doing. With a deep breath, I hit send. The reply came quickly, "I'll need something solid. Meet me tomorrow." I locked my phone and leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no turning back. When Emily came back into the kitchen, wrapped in her robe and smelling of lavender soap, I forced another smile. "Feel better?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Much," she said, sitting across from me and sipping her tea. "Thanks for being so understanding about my classes, Adam. I know I've been a little distant lately." Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to scream, to throw the truth in her face, but I swallowed the urge. Instead, I nodded. "Don't worry about it," I said, my voice steady. "I just want you to be happy." She smiled, and for a moment, it almost felt genuine. But I knew better now. As she headed off to bed, I stayed behind, staring at the photo on my phone once more. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about taking control, about reclaiming the power she'd taken from me. By this time next week, that so-called yoga studio, and everything it stood for, would be nothing but a memory. The next morning, Emily went about her routine as if nothing was wrong, humming softly while she poured her coffee. She kissed me goodbye before heading off to work, her tiger costume and betrayal tucked neatly behind her usual facade. But I wasn't the same man she thought she'd left behind in that house. I spent the day making calls and piecing together my plan. First, I met with Ryan in a dingy coffee shop downtown, sliding my phone across the table to show him the photo. His brow furrowed as he stared at the screen, then glanced up at me. "This is what they're doing at that place?" I nodded. "And it's not just them. It's the whole operation. The place is a front for illegal role-playing events. No permits, no safety checks. This photo proves it." Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, but it's not just about a photo. We'll need more, something concrete to shut them down. If it's as bad as you're saying, we can get a warrant, but only if we're sure." I'd anticipated this. Ryan wasn't the type to act without solid evidence, and I respected that. "What do you need?" "Names, schedules, anything that shows this isn't just a regular yoga studio. If we can prove they're running illegal events, we can shut it down." I clenched my fists under the table, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "I can get that," I said, my voice firm. "I'll find out everything." Ryan gave me a long look, his expression softening. "Adam, are you sure you want to do this? This is your wife we're talking about." "Exactly," I said, leaning forward. "She's been lying to me for months. I don't care what it takes, I need the truth. He nodded slowly. All right. But be careful. Back home, I waited for Emily to leave for her evening yoga class before opening her laptop. She never changed her passwords, something about trust being the foundation of a healthy marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me as I navigated through her emails and files, searching for anything that might connect her to the studio. It didn't take long. There it was, a series of email confirmations under the subject line Harmony Wellness Sessions. But the messages weren't about yoga. They mentioned themes, costumes, and private events, with times and dates that matched Emily's so-called classes. I felt a cold wave of anger wash over me. This wasn't just casual participation. She was deeply involved, her name attached to event rosters and even a few payment confirmations. I took screenshots of everything, carefully saving them to a hidden folder on my own laptop. With each click, my resolve hardened. By the time Emily returned that night, I had everything I needed. "Hey," she said brightly, dropping her bag by the door. "How was your day?" "Busy," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Anything exciting?" "Not really," I lied, smiling faintly. "Just the usual." She didn't notice the edge in my voice, too preoccupied with rummaging through the fridge. As she chatted about some mundane detail from her day, I nodded along, my mind already planning the next step. The trap was set. By the end of the week, Harmony Yoga Studio would be nothing more than a police bust. And Emily? She'd finally have to face the consequences of her betrayal. The operation happened faster than I expected. Ryan and his team moved in on Wednesday evening, armed with the information I'd gathered. I didn't need to be there, I'd already done my part, but I parked a block away from the studio, unable to stay home while everything unfolded. The quiet street was soon alive with flashing lights and the chatter of law enforcement. Uniformed officers swarmed the building, their voices echoing as they ordered everyone to step outside. A few patrons emerged first, their faces pale and sheepish as they tried to explain away their involvement. Then came Emily. She stood among the crowd, dressed in her tiger costume, her hair disheveled and her expression a mix of panic and disbelief. I saw her glance around frantically, likely searching for me, but I stayed in my car, hidden in the shadows. My phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. "We've got her and the owner. It's as bad as you said. Thanks for the tip." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, there was an emptiness, a hollow ache where my heart used to be. When Emily came home that night, hours later, after being questioned and released, I was waiting for her in the living room. She looked at me with wide eyes, her hands trembling as she dropped her bag. "You knew," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You knew, didn't you?" I nodded, holding up my phone to show her the photo. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Adam, I didn't mean for it to get this far. It was supposed to be harmless, just something different." "Something different?" I said, my voice cold. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, humiliating me. And for what? A fantasy club?" "It wasn't about you," she said, her voice barely audible. "No," I said, standing up. "It was about you. All about you. Your choices, your lies. And now, you get to live with the consequences." She sank onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. I wanted to feel pity, to feel anything other than the cold rage that had carried me through these past few days. But I couldn't. "I'll be filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "And I want you out by the end of the week." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Adam, please, we can fix this. I can fix this." I shook my head. "You didn't just break my trust, Emily. You broke us. There's no fixing that." The next few days passed in a blur. Emily packed her things and moved out, her protests growing quieter with each passing day. The studio was shut down, its owner and key members, including Emily, facing charges for their roles in the illegal operation. And me? I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy, but with every box of her belongings that left the house, I felt a little lighter. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think back to the life we'd built, the memories we'd shared, and wonder if it had all been a lie. But deep down, I knew the truth: Emily had made her choices. And now, I was free to make mine. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference.